The Hunter's Laugh, a scary story from Reddit. Subscribe to Scary Stories Vault for great videos to relax, study, or just enjoy. It started in the fall of 2020, just after the leaves began to change and the air got crisp. I remember it clearly because that was the season my best friend, Lindsay, started dating Matt. They met through a mutual friend, and at first, everything seemed great. Matt was funny, charming in a quiet sort of way, and always knew how to make Lindsay laugh. He had this old-school gentleman vibe, holding doors open and always paying for their dates. And Lindsay couldn't stop talking about how sweet he was. But there was something about him I didn't like from the beginning. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way Matt looked at people, this cold, calculating stare, like he was sizing them up even when he smiled. Or maybe it was the way he talked, always choosing his words carefully, like he was trying too hard to be perfect. But Lindsay was happy, and I didn't want to rain on her parade. So I ignored my gut and told myself I was being paranoid. The first time I met Matt's dad was about a month into their relationship. Matt invited us over for a barbecue at his family's house, a small, run-down place just outside of town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a few plastic chairs in the backyard, a rusty grill, and an old picnic table that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Matt's dad, Jim, was there, sitting in one of the plastic chairs with a beer in his hand. He was a big guy, tall and broad-shouldered, with a graying beard and a permanent scowl etched on his face. Jim was a truck driver by trade, but Matt had mentioned that he was also a skilled hunter. Apparently, Jim had grown up in the mountains and had been hunting since he was a kid. He'd killed everything from deer to bears, and he liked to talk about it a lot. "Hey there," Jim said when we arrived, his voice gravelly from years of smoking. He didn't bother getting up, just gave us a nod and raised his beer in greeting. "Matt's told me all about you two." There was something about the way he said it that made me uncomfortable. The way his eyes lingered on Lindsay a little too long, the way his mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But again, I brushed it off. I didn't want to make a scene. As the evening wore on, we sat around the picnic table, eating burgers and drinking cheap beer. Jim dominated the conversation, telling story after story about his hunting trips. At first, it was the usual stuff. How he'd tracked a deer for miles through the woods, or how he once had to fend off a bear that wandered too close to his camp. But then the stories took a darker turn. "There's nothing like the feeling of bringing something down," Jim said, his voice low and gravelly. "You wait in the woods for hours, sometimes days, tracking your prey. Then, when you finally have it in your sights, bam, he slammed bam. He slammed his fist down on the table, making me jump. It's like a rush, you know, watching the light leave its eyes." He laughed, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was this low, guttural sound, almost like a growl, and it made my skin crawl. Lindsay laughed nervously, clearly uncomfortable, but Matt just smiled like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "That's my dad," he said, grinning, always with the dark humor. Jim leaned back in his chair, taking a long swig of his beer. "Oh, I'm just joking," he said, though there was something in his eyes that made me doubt that. "But you know, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between hunting and other things. You'd be surprised how easy it is to track something, or someone, if you know what you're doing." He chuckled again, and this time, even Matt seemed a little uneasy. I wanted to leave right then and there, but Lindsay shot me a look that said, "It's fine," so I stayed, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Jim. Every time Lindsay mentioned Matt's dad, I got this knot in my stomach. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just brushed it off, saying I was overreacting. She was in love after all, and didn't want to hear anything bad about Matt or his family. Things started getting worse a few weeks later. It was a Saturday night, and Lindsay and I had planned to go out for drinks. She was supposed to meet me at this bar downtown, but when I got there, she wasn't answering her phone. I figured she was running late, but after half an hour passed with no word from her, I started to worry. I texted her again, but still no response. I even tried calling Matt, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Finally, after an hour, Lindsay called me. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what happened. I got into this Uber and—" "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm not sure," she said. "The driver? He's acting really weird. I think I made a mistake." My blood ran cold. "Lindsay, who's driving the Uber?" There was a long pause, and then she said the words that made my stomach drop. "It's Jim." I felt like I was going to be sick. "What do you mean it's Jim? Why is he driving an Uber?" "I don't know," Lindsay said, her voice trembling. "He said Matt told him to pick me up, but something doesn't feel right. He's not taking me to the bar. I don't know where we're going." "Get out of the car," I said, my voice frantic. "Right now." "I can't," Lindsay whispered. "We're on the highway. There's nowhere to go." I was panicking now. I tried to think of what to do, but my mind was racing. I could hear the fear in Lindsay's voice, and it was killing me that I couldn't do anything to help her. "I'll call the police," I said. "Just stay on the phone with me." But before I could even dial, the call disconnected. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. Over and over, I tried, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, but there was no answer. It was like she had disappeared. I called the police, told them everything I knew. They said they would send someone out to look for her, but deep down, I knew it was too late. Jim had her, and there was no telling where he'd taken her. Hours passed, and there was still no word from Lindsay. The police searched the area, but there were no leads, no signs of her anywhere. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and still nothing. I tried to talk to Matt, but he was distant, almost like he didn't care that Lindsay was missing. He said he had no idea where his dad was, that Jim had disappeared too, but I didn't believe him. There was something in his eyes, something cold and detached, like he knew more than he was letting on. Then, one night, I got a message. It was from Lindsay's phone. "Help me." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried calling her again, but once more it went straight to voicemail. I texted her back, asking where she was, what had happened, but there was no response. For days I waited, hoping for another message, but it never came. I went to the police, showed them the text, but they said there was nothing they could do. The message was too vague, and they had no way of tracking her phone. And then, one night, I saw Jim. I was at the grocery store, picking up some things for dinner, when I spotted him in one of the aisles. He was standing there, holding a can of soup, just casually browsing the shelves like nothing had happened. My heart stopped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I tried to approach him, to ask him where Lindsay was, but as soon as he saw me, he turned and walked out of the store. I followed him, but by the time I got outside, he was gone. It was like he had vanished into thin air. That was the last time I saw him. Weeks turned into months, and Lindsay was still missing. Her family had given up hope. The police had closed the case, but I couldn't let it go. I knew Jim had something to do with her disappearance, and I wasn't going to stop until I found out what happened. One night, I decided to go to Jim's house. I knew it was risky, but I had to know. I had to see if there was any clue, any sign of where Lindsay might be. When I got there, the house was dark. It looked abandoned, like no one had lived there for months. The windows were boarded up, the lawn overgrown with weeds, but I could feel it. Something was wrong. I walked around the back of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. A small, wooden shed hidden behind a row of trees. It looked old, weathered by time, but the door was slightly ajar. I don't know what made me go inside. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that I was about to find something terrible, but as soon as I stepped inside, I knew I had made a mistake. The air was thick with the smell of rot, and the floor creaked beneath my feet. In the corner of the shed, there was a large chest covered in dust. I hesitated for a moment before slowly lifting the lid. What I saw inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. There, lying in the chest, was Lindsay's phone, and next to it, a stack of pictures of Lindsay, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I knew then that Jim had taken her. He had her all along, and he had been torturing her, keeping her captive. I ran out of the shed, my mind racing. I called the police, told them everything I had found. They searched the property, but there was no sign of Jim or Lindsay. It was like they had both disappeared into thin air. To this day, I don't know what happened to her. The police never found her body, and Jim was never caught. But I know he's out there somewhere, and I know he's watching. Every now and then, I get a message. It's always the same, just 2 words. Help me. And every time, it's sent from Lindsay's phone.